All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Michael Kleiber. I'm the host for this panel. I am the CS and HMIS network specialist for Partners in Care. And like I said, I am the host, so I'll just introduce the rest of the panelists here. So first up, we have Wallace Engberg, also with Partners in Care, who is a research and planning analyst. They are an Iowa State, University of Glasgow, and AmeriCorps Vista alum with a strong background in evidence-based research. At Partners in Care, they've led the 2020 point-in-time count for those experiencing homelessness on Oahu and pushed for greater inclusion of youth and LGBTQ plus persons in the count. Their love of data and data visualization has led to in-depth analysis of pit count data to further understand how different subpopulations are affected by homelessness, as can be seen through Partner in Care's pit count sub-reports, which, by the way, are available on the website, the Partners in Care Oahu website. Cynthia Rezentes is at the Department of Hawaiian Homelessness. She has a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering and electronics. She was employed by IBM for over 17 years in various engineering and management positions, including being the lead manager for the 3900 printer, which replaced the 3800 printer. Since returning to Hawaii, she's been employed at the state legislature and congressional offices for various elected officials. Since December 2018, she's been employed at DHHL and NAHASDA compliance specialist with the goal of assisting lower income qualified individuals receive help in their housing needs as lessees. As a community volunteer, she's been a member of the neighborhood board system since 1994. She's also chair for the nonprofit Kealohu West Oahu, an organization operating 2 shelters in the Kealoha area and doing outreach along the Waianae coast. She's also chair for the nonprofit Mohala I Kauai, an organization dedicated to healthier watersheds along the Waianae district. Jen Jenkins from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Jen is a public policy advocate with the office and focuses primarily on houselessness and criminal justice system. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
So I'll kick us off, and if you want to go to the next slide, I'll be presenting about our data that we collected from last year, the 2020, or still this year, point in time count. So in terms of the Native Hawaiian population, we counted 821 individuals. So just kind of wanted to go through this step down system. So we counted overall on the night of January 23rd, 4,448 individuals, 2,268, which is 51% of the population identified as Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander as either alone or in combination of part of a multiracial background. And then from that, we have 821 people who identified as Native Hawaiian. I do want to highlight that we did collect information. There is, of that 2,268, roughly half, 1,210, we don't identified as Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, but we don't have any further racial information on them. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind. So when we're looking at the 821 though, this means that Native Hawaiians account for 18.5% of the homeless population. But when we look at the data that's collected from the census, we can see that Native Hawaiians only account for about 7.5% of the population of Oahu. So they are double the rate within our homeless population. But then also that number that I said earlier, we have all those individuals who are NHPI that we don't know. They may or may not be Native Hawaiian, so that number could be larger. Next slide, please. So some different characteristics. So when we're looking at age distribution, it's very similar to our overall homeless population. The majority are adults within that 25 to 64 year range, and the majority of small children and families are in shelters, whereas most of the adults are living unsheltered, so out on the streets. Um, but one thing that is quite interesting is when we look at gender, there's a much more even distribution of men and women within the Native Hawaiian population as compared to the overall homeless population. So the overall homeless population, there's 36 individuals, or 36% of individuals identify as women. But when we look at Native Hawaiians, it's 43%. And then when we look at the number of women alone, Native Hawaiian women account for 22%. So nearly a quarter of all women in the point in time count are Native Hawaiian. Next slide, please. So looking at household structures, so how these families are identified, whether they be living in shelter or living unsheltered, so out on the street. On the bottom graph, we can see with the point in time count, the majority are single adults, and then a quarter of them are adults and children. When we look at Native Hawaiians, the adults and children is a little bit higher, but it's roughly follows in line similar to the overall point in time count population, same with youth. But if we look at the adult-only households, they have a much larger percentage of Native Hawaiian households are adult-only households. In fact, 1/3 of all adult-only households that were counted are Native Hawaiian households. So we're seeing a larger number proportion of Native Hawaiians in adult households. So no kids, but at least one or more adults as compared to just living on their own. Next slide, please. So some other interesting facts. So we have been collecting for the past 2 years those who say that those who identify as Native Hawaiian. We ask if they're eligible for Hawaiian homelands, and then we ask if they're on the wait list. So from this, we can see that nearly half say that they're eligible for the Hawaiian homelands, but only 16% I said that they are actually on the wait list. This is also something that we realized this past year of that we also want to look into trying to, with future point in time counts, getting a consent to share from our individuals who identify as Native Hawaiian, so that way we can then connect them to DHHL and see if they can be of assistance in terms of housing. Other really interesting facts is 184 Native Hawaiians own pets. So that's 52% of all the pet owner population, so quite a significant portion. And most of them live in Region 7, so half. And then also of those 184 pet owners, over half of them are repeaters. So this means that we have counted them in point in time counts from 2017 to 2020. So if they have a pet, they're more likely to then be counted over multiple years. And then also 23% of all sexual and gender minorities, so individuals who identify as lesbian, bisexual, gay, or transgender, or another sexual orientation or gender identity in that umbrella, are Native Hawaiian. So it's quite significant that they make up such a large proportion of our sexual and gender minority population. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, sorry. I did want to clarify from the last slide when I said that most of the pet owners lived in Region 7. Region 7 is the Waianae Coast. I apologize. I get too into my own head about point in time count. So looking at health comparisons, so when we're looking at Native Hawaiians versus the overall point in time count population, we can see that Native Hawaiians have disproportionately higher rates of health conditions, from serious mental illness to disability to substance use. And then this falls directly into chronic homelessness, where we can see they are chronically homeless at nearly double the rate. So they not only have disabling conditions, but then they've been homeless for an extended period of time as well. We can also see that domestic violence, so a lifetime experience of domestic violence and then currently fleeing domestic violence, is also much higher within our Native Hawaiian population as compared to our overall point in time count population. So, and 1/3 of all individuals who've experienced a lifetime of domestic violence are Native Hawaiian. So it's a really large portion. And then next slide. So this is one of the data points that I find most startling and interesting over the next 2 slides. So looking at repeaters, this is something I touched on a little bit earlier, but one of the things that we've looked at for the first time this year. So we went over and compiled all 4 years worth of point in time count data, unsheltered and sheltered, from 2017 to 2020. And then we're able to track if individuals were counted multiple times. And so for the overall population, about 27% were counted more than once, for anywhere from 2 to 4 times. But when you look at Native Hawaiians, it's 56% of Native Hawaiians were counted multiple times for multiple years. And so when we look at how does this play out in terms of the distribution of individuals who are counted in shelters versus unsheltered? So when we look at that graph on the right, the gray is our unsheltered population and the blue is our sheltered population. With non-Native Hawaiians, 65% of those repeaters are unsheltered. But when we look at the Native Hawaiian population, 52% of the repeaters are in the shelter population. So there's a disproportionate, it's a more even distribution, but it means that the Native Hawaiians are in shelters are potentially staying there longer. So I want to go further into this sheltered population, this 52%. So if we go next slide, please. So looking at that, we can see from those who are in shelter this last year, 91% of our 262 individual Native Hawaiians individuals who were in shelter, 91% had been counted in a previous point in time count. The majority had been counted in 2, so in 2019, but there's also a handful that have been counted in 2018 and in 2017. And now if we look at Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders whose racial breakdown we don't know, we can see that 41% were repeaters. And then if you look at all individuals in shelter who are not Native Hawaiian, the incidence of repeat is only 26%. So this data suggests that even once Native Hawaiians are in shelter, they're not exiting homelessness perhaps as quickly as non-Native Hawaiians, and therefore they're staying homeless for much longer. So that is what I have, and I will turn it over to Cynthia and to talk about Hawaiian homelands.
Thanks, Wallace. So earlier this year, when we first started getting hit with this COVID pandemic, internally we looked at knowing that without rental assistance, even some of our waitlisters, those waitlists who are currently renting, could potentially be impacted by lack of rental assistance as they lose their jobs or loss of income. So we approached the Hawaiian Homes Commission, and in April were given permission to go ahead what we call the DHHL COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or DRAP for short. We did announce the program May 11th in 2020. We have available $7 million from what's called NAHASA funds for Native Hawaiian block grant funds, if you will. And we had essentially stated that we could use up to $7 million to assist people. As many of you know, we have about 29,000 people or separate applicants on our wait list. The conditions to receive assistance were that you had to be impacted by COVID-19, either the loss of a job or your income, must be 80% or less of area median income, and I think a lot of us know what that means. You had to be Native Hawaiian as defined on the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and on the published DHHL waitlist, which is on our website, as effective as of December 31st, 2018. So to translate that, that means people with 50% blood quantum, which we've already vetted their genealogy for and who are applicants. What we would allow for at the time was security deposit and up to 6 months rental assistance. This anticipated that we might encounter certain families who were maybe doubling up, and due to the challenges of everybody being at home in one place at one time, might want to essentially split their household. So we included security deposit and up to 6 months of rental assistance. Again, as we all thought, oh, this is going to be short and sweet, 6 months, 9 months, and then we'll all get back to quote unquote normal, not anticipating that it was going to be a much lengthier process. And the other thing is that the primary residence had to be in the state of Hawaii. We do have waitlisters that are located on the continent, but what we were looking at was specifically the people here in Hawaii that would be impacted, who are living here and being impacted by COVID while awaiting potentially an offer for a lease. If you could move forward, please. So what became evident as time moved on is we also had individuals who had what are called undivided interest leases. Those folks know who they are. So in June 18, 2020, we extended the program to those lessees who still have not gotten their land lease, but are holding a paper lease for when land in a specific subdivision becomes available, they could access that. The other thing we did was, again, as we were facing the cliffs, as you will, of how long rental assistance was going to last, how long the CARES Act was going to last, the eviction moratorium. In August, we again went back and requested that we extend the program for rental assistance for a total of 12 months. So to put that in perspective, even today, we're still, AUW is taking applications, and if we don't help you with back payment, you can get a total of 12 months of assistance on our program. What we do have is I have provided a link that has a little video that goes through a lot of this detail. And the other thing is that AUW was good enough that with 211 being totally inundated with everybody else and the rest of their programs, we do have a direct line in AUW for people wanting to access this program. It's 543-2219, and we ask that people access that number because that goes to the specific group of individuals that are helping us implement our program. Next slide, please. So the next thing we did was, given all of this, we started talking about what is DHHL's role with homelessness, considering that there had been reports in the last 2 PIT counts that there were a number of individuals reporting as Native Hawaiian and either being on the wait list or qualified. So we put together an MOU with Partners in Care this year, and that allowed us access to the by name list to determine qualified Native Hawaiian beneficiaries as listed on the published DHHL wait list. Most of those individuals that were already sorted by the by name list that PIC provided, that they had did an initial scrub on, were confirmed to be Native Hawaiian beneficiaries listed on the published wait list. In addition to that, we went back and gained access to the 2019 and 20 point in time counts. And while the numbers were not as large, we did find a number of individuals in both of those years there were also qualified Native Hawaiian beneficiaries as listed on our wait list. Where we are right now is we're considering what, if any, programs DHHL can provide in keeping with the intent of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. As many of you know, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is what DHHL implements. And it is primarily for the rehabilitation of Native Hawaiians and to get them back on the land. You've seen many articles saying, okay, we have this problem, that problem, but that's basically our mission. It's difficult to figure out, especially with as many people as we have on the wait list, how we can help people without jumping them ahead of others who are on the wait list, let's say. So what kind of programs can we provide that potentially assist with the Native Hawaiian homeless? And as we go through what our options are, see whether or not our NAHASA funding will hold steady so that we could potentially use that instead of our trust funds, how we can partner with everybody else in assisting the Native Hawaiian homeless to improve their lot, and especially for the homeless to get services that we could help assist with. So that is it, and I will turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Cynthia. Aloha, everyone. You can go to the next slide. So just to give us like kind of some grounding for my presentation, this is OHA's constitutional basis. So we're constitutionally mandated. And then for the purposes of this presentation, I'll just highlight we're mandated to better the conditions for Native Hawaiians. We have a fiduciary relationship with our beneficiaries, and in solemn trust, we're obligated and responsible to Native Hawaiians. Where it's our duty and responsibility. It's also the duty and responsibility of all state departments to carry out their missions to serve Native Hawaiians as well. Next slide, please. So the way that we carry out our constitutional mandate or our purpose is through coordination of programs and activities relating to Native Hawaiians. We also assess policies and practices of other agencies, and we partner in terms of advocacy. We also provide grants. So we encourage people to apply for and we donate to and provide grants for Native Hawaiian programs and services. Next slide, please. So these are some of our partners or collaborators that we currently work with or and have worked with historically. Hawaiian Community Assets, Partners in Care. We were on the Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness. And then we also are in a data sharing agreement with the Lulu Komani Trust and Partners in Care. Next slide, please. We've also funded many organizations. I won't go through the entire list, but just as you can see, we fund a broad swath of organizations that we know that assist Native Hawaiians. Salvation Army's on there, Awilike, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, and many others. Next slide, please. This is a great success story. I won't play it just in the interest of time. If later on, towards the end of the presentation, we have more time, I'll play the entire video. It's about 2 minutes. But this is the Josui Ahama. OHA won the 2018 Native Hawaiian Housing Award at the CNHA convention. Together with Hawaiian Community Assets, we were able to get the Josui family housed. They were experiencing houselessness for a long time. And OHA was able to fund through the Hawaiian Community Assets, them getting into a home, and you can see that they're very happy now. Next slide, please. So our advocacy is one of the main reasons that I'm going to present on today. We recognize that that houselessness is being heavily criminalized for things such as obstructing sidewalks, trespassing, sleeping in parks after dark, sit-lie bans. And this is proliferating, especially among the Native Hawaiian community, because not only are Native Hawaiians disproportionately experiencing houselessness, which Wallace pointed to, Native Hawaiians are also disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. There are programs that exist to address this particular issue, but they're limited in capacity. And citations and arrests and incarceration still continue despite those efforts. Next slide, please. So a solution that the state already uses for criminal records specifically is expungements. What expungements do are clear criminal records from a person's basically stored data within the state or city's criminal records database. With the tool of expungement, people can clear certain records as long as they qualify under those expungement statutes. At the moment, there are no expungement statutes that apply directly to convictions related to houselessness. And there's no bill number yet, so we're calling it OHA 3 for this presentation. And what OHA 3 would do would allow for expungement of conviction records for certain state and county offenses that arise from a person's houseless status. And just for an example of other expungement statutes that currently exist, there's one that exists for first-time drug offenses, there's one for first-time property offenses, and then there's a record-clearing statute for non-conviction arrests as well. Next slide, please. So under our OHA's, this is OHA's proposed bill, this is what it would do. So like I said, we noticed that there is a proliferation of convictions arising from people's status as from being houseless. We know that Native Hawaiians are disproportionately houseless, and we know that Native Hawaiians are also disproportionately criminalized. So what this bill would do, that we'll introduce to the legislature in 2021, is going to do everything that's listed there. So for any nonviolent offense, a person can apply to get their record expunged so that they can obtain employment. And I'll go through what barriers a person can go through if they have a criminal record. But what the bill would do, especially, is waive all court fines and fees, which of course, we know that people experiencing houselessness tend to be no income or extremely low income. The measure also encourages people seeking to seek financial help or mental help, but that's not required. And there's also a form included in the bill that will allow the person to just fill it out, hand it over to the judge, or to the agency that's going to handle the expungements, and then they can get their record clear. And it's important to note that the bill isn't preventing citations or arrests. This is at the end of the process. So hypothetically, a person who applies for expungement of their house's conviction will still most likely go through the entire system. They'll still do any time served. They'll still fulfill any requirements that the court orders. Typically, for these types of crimes, people don't serve probation, but if they're on probation for something else, then that still needs to be satisfied. And then this statute in particular, if it became law, would be in HRS Chapter 706, and that would be in there with the other statutes that I mentioned that are currently exist for expungement. So that would be in there with the first-time property offense and the drug conviction expungements. Next slide, please. So, like I said, this is a statute that OHA drafted for the 21 session. It's a part of our package, our legislative package, and we noted the problem that houselessness is disproportionately impacting Native Hawaiians. And we also know that once that conviction goes on a person's record, it's never going away. We also know the barriers that come with related to convictions. OHA passed a measure this past session to improve the state's ban the box law. And there we found that that had a conviction record was more likely to be discriminated in employment. So you can only imagine what it's like for a houseless person who is trying to find employment or even a housing. There's potential for discrimination there too, and there's zero protections. At least with employment, there's more of a limit on what an employer can do. But if a person applies to housing, they basically have to admit whether or not they have convictions, and it's the evidence and the research is indisputable that people will be discriminated against because of their record. So our solution is that expungement will clear the way. It's going to mitigate the bill hopefully would mitigate the long-lasting impacts of the criminalization of houselessness. It could potentially reduce barriers to obtaining employment, housing, and public benefits. It'll reduce stigma. It creates a greater opportunity for success, and it potentially could increase public safety. Because people won't be out on the streets, there's less likely for contact with police, with other people.
Let's move on to the Q&A portion. So I'll read out some of the questions. It looks like some of the questions have actually already been answered by some of the panelists, so thank you. So our first question is, in what ways is the Department of Hawaiian Homelands working towards eliminating the 50% blood quantum in order for Kanaka Maoli to even be considered for Hawaiian homelands?
That's a continuing discussion that is beyond my realm. I do know discussions to reduce that, because at this point in time, even for successorship, if mom and dad are 50% and they don't specifically designate a son or daughter at 25%, say, that's not going to happen. They won't be eligible. So I know that there has been ongoing discussion and whether or not that's going to need a congressional change.
Thank you. We have another question. Looking at solutions for Native Hawaiian homeless issues, what kind of CBPR is being used to address the issue? So community-based participatory research.
I am currently unaware. I don't know if Jen or Cynthia might know.
Not for me.
Okay, so put that as an I don't know. And then this is one of the questions that Wallace already answered, but I want to bring it up to, so somebody asked what a scrub was. So a scrub is a way to clean up data, eliminating potentially private information from our databases, so that so it wouldn't impact DHL's ability to use the information. So removing social security numbers and other date of births, things like that, that could identify a person. Next question. How many individuals have currently been helped through DRAP, and also how is being on the DHHL wait list a plus, so to speak, for Native Hawaiians if the wait is decades long?
We have, it's surprising. We had expected a waterfall of individuals applying for rental assistance. We've probably taken in a few hundred applications and helped about 100 or so families, which is a lot less than what we had expected. And we're not sure yet why the numbers are so small. The only thing we can think of is those that are on the wait list, even though they continue to want to be on Hawaiian homelands, are attempting to live their lives without that coming forward as quickly as possible. As far as for those who are on the wait list for decades, I know that there has been an impetus within the next few years to bring up at least another, a total of, and I'm not sure how many have already been awarded, about 1,500 leases. That doesn't address 29,000 applicants, but the 29,000 applicants include residential pass out. I'm assuming that people may or may not have heard that we've gotten about 100 plus or minus people assisted. We had anticipated a lot more, but our wait list also includes people who are looking for residential, pastoral, and agricultural lands. As far as being on the wait list for decades, I know that the department had a mission that within 5 years, we wanted to get at least another 1,500 leases out there. So we're in the middle of that. I know we've provided some leases and we're on target to get at least that many out, while we're still looking at what other resources can we do to develop even more opportunities for individuals. Because a lot of it, don't forget, relies upon whether or not we have the funding in which to either build the infrastructure for a subdivision and or assist with housing via whatever sources we have.
Thank you. All right. The next question is about police officers. So often they have, individual officers have military history. Is there a correlation between the number of citations handed out by officers with military history versus officers without military history? If there is a correlation, could the discrepancies be addressed through training? I think this is properly a question for the police department, but if any of us want to take a swing at it.
So it's somewhat related to the OHA's bill. What I will say is, yeah, definitely a question for the police department. And measure just passed this session for greater transparency. So I recommend either going to the police commission and asking, or directly to, for Oahu at least, directly to HPD.
Sorry, excuse me. Next question. What should we say to homeowners and business owners who feel that they're being negatively impacted by people in front of their business and houses and feel that it is detrimental to them? So I'll turn it over to Jen. Jen did answer this, but just in case anybody wants to hear.
Sure. So my response to that was, you could tell business owners that all the measures that are in place to protect their businesses are still going to be there. The statute doesn't affect any of the power the police or state or city have to ask people to leave the sidewalk. However, the goal at least of the bill is that we'll get people off the streets permanently, and hopefully they won't have to be swept or moved. And that would be done because the person would then would be more likely to qualify for employment or housing because they wouldn't have those convictions holding them back.
Thank you. All right, and there are a number of questions up in the chat, actually. So if any further questions, I would encourage you to go back down to the Q&A, but I will see if I can pull out some of the questions that we have here. So let's see. Are Hawaiian Homestead beneficiaries able to renew the 99-year lease, and do they have the same rights as a leasee of 50% Hawaiian?
The original 90 point can be extended one more time, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not sure what you're talking about, from original lessee to who? I'm looking for that question.
Sure, it's up in the chat. It's the last one in the chat box. So it says, so are Hawaiian Homestead beneficiaries, so successors under 50% Hawaiian, able to renew a 99-year lease, and do they have the same rights as the leasee of, let's say, over or at least 50% Hawaiian?
Okay, so if that's a specific question, I don't know the answer to that, but once somebody becomes a lessee, they're a lessee and a beneficiary. So that would be something that we'd have to ask internally. If a lessee of less than 50% could extend that 99-year lease, I'm thinking yes, but I can't be 100% sure.
Thank you. Another question we have up in the chat is, what programs are being implemented to reduce the number of unsheltered Native Hawaiians or to secure housing options? I know there are a number of, I work with the CES team at Partners in Care. We do a certain amount, but we don't address Native Hawaiians directly. We just do it based on vulnerability on the by name list. Wallace?
Yeah, that I am currently aware of, I do not believe there are any programs that specifically target the Native Hawaiian population. There are definitely organizations that are working in regions of the island that have a higher percentage of Native Hawaiians. So by default, they tend to work with the Native Hawaiian population more. So, organizations that are out on the Waianae coast or out in Waimanalo or, the North Shore and areas like that. But specifically, a program that that kind of has that qualifier of being Native Hawaiian. I am not aware.
And we have a question down in the Q&A box. Thank you. What COVID rent mortgage assistance has OHA done? So COVID specific. Most COVID CARES Act funding available now will end at the end of December. Can OHA get a program ready for Native Hawaiians in January?
I don't want to get myself in too much trouble, but I will just distinguish. So yeah, COVID CARES funds are federal, those are like federal dollars that OHA, yeah, it's a little different. So what we did that I know of, and I'm sure there's more, and I'm going to suggest you go to our website for like the full breadth of information, but we definitely assisted organizations in getting those dollars that we knew would be serving Native Hawaiian. For like a much more detailed explanation, definitely check out our website. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And sorry, Wallace, can I ask you to read the question because from Connie, because I can't find it.
So Cynthia, this would be a question for you. Is the DHHL willing to assist Kauhale construction as another option for some people?
That's what I was alluding to in my last bullet, that essentially says that we're exploring various options, but upon what our funding is, we have to maintain strict guidelines as far as the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and what the intent of DHHL is supposed to be doing to assist that category of Native Hawaiians. And since we do have a wait list, we already have a process in place. As far as looking at other opportunities there, like NAHASA funding, we are looking at various options, but nothing has been decided at this point. But we are open for
Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Wallace.
No, I was just going to say, and then Carla Hostetter also put in the chat a link that CNHA has funding for emergencies. It's 2.17 million and around 700,000 for food security. And there's a link included as well. So be sure to check that out.
Thank you. And looks like Danny Cheng from Queens is asking, so Queens Medical Center has a program specifically identifying Hawaiian homeless individuals and prioritizing them for care and coordination. Sorry, not a question, just letting us know. So thank you, Danny.
No, that is perfect. I would, yes, if anybody watching has kind of those kind of insights of your organization, or you know organizations that are prioritizing Native Hawaiians experiencing homelessness or houselessness, and those kind of, we would love to know about it. So that way we can be more informed when questions like this come up.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A box. So I'll bring this to a close. Thank you everyone for being here, especially the panelists. Really appreciate your help. So I just want to remind everyone this is being recorded, and there will be it will be available on I think the website, the city website, so honolulu.gov/housing/homelessness. Look for links to all the recordings, not just this one. Are there any last questions before we go?
I will just make one last little announcement. So the data that I shared as part of this presentation I'm currently finalizing with OHA LT and DHHL a sub-report that's specifically looking at Native Hawaiians, and we're hoping to release that hopefully by the end of the month. So stay tuned for that, and then hopefully that report and that data can kind of go towards these, where we didn't have answers because we don't know of programs or, funding streams. And that data can be then used to hopefully make changes that impact Native Hawaiians for the better. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, looks like somebody's having trouble accessing the links. So what I'll do is I'll go through and collect the links, and please, if you go to the Partners in Care website, you can find, my name's Michael Kleiber. You can write to me and I will email them out in case they somehow aren't getting out there. Okay. And again, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Have a great rest of the conference.